Samuel Morrison stood in front of his small mirror and ran his fingers through his dark hair. He had been awake since before sunrise, but today was different. Today was the day his bride would arrive. For 3 years, he had written letters to Margaret O'Sullivan in Ireland. Her letters came back written in neat handwriting, telling him about her life and asking about his ranch. The ranch was quiet now. Too quiet. Samuel lived alone in the big wooden house his father had built 20 years ago. His mother had died 2 winters ago, and since then the house felt empty. The wind whistled through the rooms and Samuel ate his meals in silence. He was 35 years old and tired of being alone. Samuel walked to his kitchen and made coffee. His hands shook a little as he held the cup. He was nervous. What if Margaret did not like him? What if she thought his ranch was too far from town? What if she wanted to go back to Ireland? He had sent her money for the trip 3 months ago. The letter from the marriage agency said she would arrive on the afternoon stagecoach. Samuel looked at the letter again. The paper was worn from being folded and unfolded so many times. Miss Margaret O'Sullivan will arrive in Cedar Falls on October 15th, it said. Samuel put on his best shirt and his clean pants. He polished his boots until they shined. He wanted to look good for Margaret. In her letters, she had seemed kind and smart. She wrote about helping her family on their small farm in Ireland. She said she wanted to come to America to start a new life. The morning passed slowly. Samuel tried to do his usual work, but his mind kept thinking about Margaret. He fed his horses and checked on his cattle. The animals seemed to sense something different about him today. His horse, Thunder, kept looking at him with curious eyes. Around noon, Samuel hitched Thunder to his wagon and started the long ride to town. Cedar Falls was 15 miles away from his ranch. The road was bumpy and dusty, but Samuel did not mind. He had made this trip many times to buy supplies and pick up mail. But today felt special. As he rode, Samuel thought about Margaret's letters. She had told him she was 26 years old with red hair and green eyes. She said she liked to cook and sew. She asked him about his ranch and his cattle. In his letters back, Samuel told her about the wide open spaces and the mountains in the distance. He told her about the peaceful mornings and the beautiful sunsets. Samuel stopped his wagon near a field of wildflowers. He got down and picked a small bunch of yellow and purple flowers. Margaret might like them. His mother had always loved wildflowers. She used to put them in a jar on the kitchen table. The memory made Samuel smile and feel sad at the same time. The road to town was busier than usual. Samuel passed other wagons and people on horseback. Some of them waved at him. Mr. Johnson, who owned the general store, tipped his hat as he rode by. "Big day today, Samuel?" Mr. Johnson called out. "Yes, sir," Samuel replied. He did not want to talk much, he was too nervous. Cedar Falls was a small town with one main street. There was the general store, the hotel, the saloon, and the church. The stagecoach station was at the end of the street. Samuel had been there many times, but today his heart was beating fast as he got closer. He tied Thunder to a post near the station and walked inside. The station master, Mr. Brown, was reading a newspaper behind his desk. "Afternoon, Samuel," Mr. Brown said without looking up. "Coach should be here in about an hour." Samuel nodded and sat down on a wooden bench. The station was small and smelled like dust and leather. Other people were waiting too. An old woman sat in the corner with a basket on her lap. A man in a suit checked his pocket watch every few minutes. Samuel held the wildflowers carefully. They were starting to wilt a little in the warm air. He hoped Margaret would not mind that they were not perfect. On his ranch, nothing was ever perfect, but everything was real and honest. Time moved very slowly. Samuel watched the clock on the wall. He listened to the sounds outside. A dog barked somewhere. Children played in the street. Normal life continued while Samuel waited for his life to change. At 3 o'clock, they heard the sound of horses and wheels on the road. The stagecoach was coming. Samuel stood up and smoothed down his shirt. His mouth felt dry. The other people in the station also stood up and moved toward the door. The stagecoach stopped outside with a cloud of dust. The driver climbed down and began untying luggage from the top. Samuel stepped outside and looked at the coach door. His hands held the wildflower so tightly that his knuckles were white. The door opened, and people began to step out. First came the man in the suit, then the old woman. Samuel waited, watching for red hair and green eyes. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. But something was wrong. The other passengers were walking away, and no young woman with red hair had gotten out of the coach. Samuel stepped closer, confused. Maybe Margaret was still inside. Then he saw a small figure in strange clothes step carefully down from the coach. It was a woman, but she did not look like Margaret at all. She had straight black hair and dark eyes. Her skin was pale, and she wore unusual clothing that Samuel had never seen before. She carried a worn leather bag and looked around, with frightened eyes. Samuel stared at her, not understanding. Where was Margaret? Who was this woman? She looked lost and scared, standing alone by the stagecoach as other people moved around her. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper. She looked at it, then looked around the station. When her eyes met Samuel's, she walked toward him slowly. She held out the paper with shaking hands. Samuel looked at the paper. In neat handwriting it said, Samuel Morrison, Cedar Falls, Montana. His name was written there, but this woman was not Margaret O'Sullivan. Samuel looked up at her face. She was young and pretty, but she was definitely not the Irish woman he had been expecting. The stagecoach driver finished unloading and climbed back onto his seat. People started walking away from the station. Soon, Samuel and the strange woman were standing alone, looking at each other with confusion and fear. Neither of them knew what to do next. Samuel stared at the piece of paper in his hands. His name was written there clearly, but the woman standing in front of him was not Margaret O'Sullivan. She was small and thin with long black hair that was pulled back neatly. Her clothes were different from anything Samuel had ever seen. The fabric was silk and had beautiful patterns of flowers and birds, but her clothes were wrinkled and dusty from the long journey. The woman looked up at Samuel with dark, worried eyes. She said something in a language Samuel did not understand. Her voice was soft and musical, but the words meant nothing to him. She pointed to the paper and then to herself, then to Samuel. Samuel shook his head slowly. I don't understand, he said. Where is Margaret? Margaret O'Sullivan? The woman's face showed that she did not understand his words either. She reached into her bag again and pulled out another paper. This one was more official looking, with stamps and seals on it. Samuel could see some English words, but most of it was written in strange characters that looked like small pictures. People from the town had started to notice them. Mrs. Patterson, who worked at the hotel, stopped to stare. Two men from the saloon came over to see what was happening. Samuel felt uncomfortable with all the attention. Samuel, called Mr. Brown from inside the station. Is there a problem? Samuel walked over to the station master with the woman following, behind him. This lady has my name written on a paper, Samuel said. But she's not the person I was expecting. I don't think she speaks English. Mr. Brown looked at the woman and frowned. She's Chinese, he said. What's a Chinese woman doing? With your name? The woman seemed to understand that they were talking about her. She said something again in her language and showed them both papers. She pointed to Samuel and then to herself several times. Looks like there's been some kind of mix-up, Mr. Brown said. The stagecoach came from San Francisco. Maybe something went wrong there. Samuel felt confused and frustrated. He had waited 3 years for Margaret to come. He had planned everything carefully. Now this strange woman was here instead, and he did not know what to do. More people gathered around them. Samuel heard them whispering. Some of the comments were not kind. What's Samuel doing with a Chinese girl? Someone said. Where did she come from? Said another voice. The woman seemed to understand that people were staring at her. She moved closer to Samuel as if she thought he might protect her. Her hands shook as she held her bag. Samuel looked down at her. She was scared, he could see, that clearly. She was far from home, just like he had been expecting Margaret to be. But this woman was in a much stranger place than Margaret would have been. At least Margaret spoke English. "Miss?" Samuel said gently. He pointed to himself. "Samuel?" Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows, hoping she would understand that he wanted to know her name. The woman looked at him for a moment. Then she pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Li Mei. She said it again more slowly when she saw Samuel trying to understand. "Li Mei," Samuel repeated. The woman nodded and smiled a little. It was the first time Samuel had seen her smile, and it made her face look less frightened. Mr. Brown was looking through some papers on his desk. "Samuel," he called. "Come here a minute." Samuel walked over to the desk. The woman, Li Mei, followed him closely. "I found the passenger list from the stagecoach," Mr. Brown said. "There's no Margaret O'Sullivan on here, but there's a name that looks Chinese. Can't pronounce it, but it might be her." Samuel looked at the list. One name was written in English letters but looked very different from any name he knew. Next to it, someone had written, "Samuel Morrison, Cedar Falls," in pencil. "It looks like someone at the stagecoach office mixed up the papers," Mr. Brown said. "This Chinese lady got your information instead of wherever she was supposed to go." "But where is Margaret?" Samuel asked. "Don't know," Mr. Brown said. "Maybe she got someone else's papers. Could be anywhere by now." Samuel felt tired suddenly. All his planning and hoping seemed wasted. He looked at Li Mei, who was standing quietly beside him. She looked tired too. Her journey had probably been much longer and harder than his trip to town. The stagecoach driver was getting ready to leave. Samuel walked over to him quickly. "Excuse me," he said. "Where did this lady get on the coach?" The driver looked at Li Mei. "San Francisco," he said. "But I just drive the coach, mister. Don't know anything about who's supposed to go where." "Is there another coach going back soon?" Samuel asked. "Not for a week," the driver said, "and it costs money to ride." Samuel realized that Li Mei probably did not have money for another ticket. She was stuck in Cedar Falls just like he was stuck with the situation. The sun was getting lower in the sky. Samuel knew he needed to make a decision. He could not leave Li Mei alone in town. She did not speak English, and she did not know anyone. The hotel might not even let her stay there. Some of the people in town were already looking at her with unfriendly eyes. Samuel thought about his empty house on the ranch. He thought about Margaret, who was probably somewhere else with someone else's papers. He thought about Li Mei, who was far from her home and family. "Li Mei," he said, getting her attention. She looked up at him with hopeful eyes. Samuel pointed to his wagon and then down the road toward his ranch. "Come," he said. "Come with me." Li Mei looked uncertain. Samuel tried to show her with gestures that she would be safe. He pointed to himself and made a gesture like protecting something. Then he pointed to his wagon again. Li Mei looked around at the people staring at her. She looked at the unfamiliar town and the strange buildings. Then she looked back at Samuel. She seemed to make a decision. She nodded slowly. Samuel picked up her bag and walked to his wagon. Li Mei followed him. The people in town watched as Samuel helped her climb up onto the wagon seat. He could hear them talking, but he tried not to listen. As Samuel drove his wagon out of town, he felt confused about what would happen next. He had a Chinese woman who did not speak English riding beside him. He did not know anything about her or why she had come to America. He did not know where Margaret was or if he would ever see her. Li Mei sat quietly on the wagon seat. She looked at the wide open land around them with wonder. Everything must look very different from where she came from, Samuel thought. The mountains in the distance, the endless grass, the big sky, it was all new to her. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, except for the sound of the wagon wheels and Thunder's hooves. Samuel did not know what he was going to do, but he knew he could not leave Li Mei alone and scared in a strange place. He would figure out the rest later. The sun was setting as Samuel's wagon reached his ranch. The house looked smaller than usual with Li Mei sitting beside him. Samuel suddenly felt nervous about bringing a stranger into his home. What would she think of his simple life? What Would they do when they could not talk to each other? Li Mei looked at the house and the barn with curious eyes. She saw the cattle in the distance and the chickens walking around the yard. Everything was quiet except for the wind and the sound of thunder breathing hard from the long trip. Samuel stopped the wagon near the front porch. He got down first and then helped Li Mei down. She was lighter than he expected and her hand felt small in his. She still carried her leather bag close to her body. Samuel opened the front door and stepped inside. The house felt even emptier than usual. He lit a lamp and the warm light filled the main room. Li Mei stood in the doorway, not sure if she should come in. Samuel gestured for her to enter. "Come in," he said slowly and clearly. Li Mei stepped inside and looked around. The room had a fireplace, a wooden table, 2 chairs, and some shelves with books. Everything was clean but simple. Li Mei said something in her language. Samuel thought she might be saying the room was nice, but he could not be sure. She walked slowly around the room, looking at everything carefully. She stopped at a photograph on the shelf. It showed Samuel with an older man and woman. Samuel came over and pointed to the photograph. "My mother and father," he said. He pointed to himself as a young man in the picture, then to the older man. "Father," then to the woman. "Mother." Li Mei nodded. She seemed to understand. She pointed to the woman in the photograph and then to I. Samuel then looked around the house with questioning eyes. Samuel shook his head sadly. "Dead," he said. "Both dead." He was not sure if she would understand, but her face showed that she did. Li Mei looked sad and said something softly in her language. Samuel showed Li Mei around the small house. There were 3 rooms: the main room, his bedroom, and a smaller bedroom that had been his parents' room. There was also a kitchen area with a wood stove and a table for preparing food. When they reached the smaller bedroom, Samuel pointed to it and then to Li Mei. "You," he said. "You sleep here." The room had a bed, a small table, and a chair. Samuel's mother's clothes were still in a trunk in the corner. Li Mei looked uncertain. She said something and pointed to Samuel, then to herself, then to the room. Samuel thought she was asking if it was proper for her to stay in his house. Samuel pointed to himself and then toward the barn outside. "I sleep there," he said. He made gestures of sleeping and pointed to the barn again. Li Mei seemed to understand that Samuel would not be sleeping in the house with her. In the kitchen, Samuel realized he was hungry, and Li Mei probably was too, but he did not know what she liked to eat. His usual meals were simple: meat, bread, beans, and coffee. He did not know if Chinese people ate the same foods. Samuel opened a can of beans and cut some bread. He put water on the stove to boil and made coffee. Li Mei watched everything he did with interest. When the food was ready, Samuel put it on 2 plates and set them on the table. Li Mei looked at the food but did not start eating. Samuel realized she might be waiting for permission, or maybe the food looked strange to her. He sat down and started eating, hoping she would do the same. After a moment, Li Mei sat down carefully. She picked up the spoon and tasted the beans. Her face showed surprise, but not in a bad way. She ate slowly and politely. When Samuel offered her coffee, she smelled it first, then took a small sip. She made a face that showed it was very different from what she was used to drinking. Samuel poured her a glass of water instead. Li Mei smiled and drank the water gratefully. It was the second time Samuel had seen her smile. After dinner, Samuel was not sure what to do. Usually he read a book or wrote in his journal before going to sleep. But with Li Mei there, everything felt different and awkward. Li Mei stood up and began clearing the table. She took the plates to the kitchen area and looked around for a place to wash them. Samuel showed her where he kept the washing basin and the soap. Li Mei nodded and began washing the dishes carefully. Samuel watched her work. Her movements were graceful and sure. She seemed to know how to take care of a house. When she finished with the dishes, she looked around the kitchen and began organizing things that were out of place. Samuel got his bedding from his room and prepared to go to the barn. He showed Li Mei how to lock the front door from the inside. "Safe," he said, trying to show her that she would be protected. Li Mei said something that sounded like thank you in her language. She bowed her head slightly, which Samuel thought was her way of being polite. Samuel walked to the barn with his blankets. The barn was warm and dry, and he had slept there before when he was sick and did not want to heat the whole house. But tonight it felt strange to be sleeping outside his own home. He lay on the hay and looked up at the roof of the barn. Through a small window, he could see light in the house where Li Mei was getting ready for sleep. Samuel wondered what she was thinking. Was she scared? Was she missing her family? Did she understand that he was trying to help her? Samuel also thought about Margaret. Where was she tonight? Was she safe? Was she wondering where he was? All his plans had changed in one day, and he did not know what would happen tomorrow. In the house, Li Mei was also lying awake. The bed was comfortable and the room was warm, but everything was strange. The sounds were different from what she was used to. The smell of the house was different. Even the air felt different. Li Mei looked at her few belongings in the leather bag. She had so little left from her old life. She touched a small jade bracelet that had belonged to her grandmother. It was one of the few valuable things she had managed to bring with her. She thought about the long journey from China to San Francisco, and then the train and stagecoach rides that brought her here. She had been trying to reach her cousin in another town, but somehow the papers had been mixed up. Now she was in this lonely place with a man who could not understand her words. But the man, Samuel, seemed kind. He had not been angry when she was not the person he expected. He had brought her to his home and given her food and a safe place to sleep. Li Mei hoped she could find a way to repay his kindness. Both Samuel and Li Mei lay awake for a long time that first night, wondering what their new life together would be like. Neither of them knew that this confused beginning would slowly turn into something neither had expected. In the morning, they would have to figure out how to live together, how to communicate, and how to survive in a situation that neither of them had planned for. Samuel woke up early as he always did, but this morning felt different. He remembered that Li Mei was sleeping in his house. He got up from his hay bed in the barn and walked quietly to the house. He did not want to scare her by making too much noise. When he looked through the kitchen window, he saw Li Mei was already awake. She was standing by the stove, looking at it with confusion. Samuel realized she probably did not know how to use his wood stove. The stoves in China were likely very different. Samuel knocked softly on the door. Li Mei opened it and smiled when she saw him. She pointed to the stove and said something in her language. Her tone sounded like she was asking for help. Samuel nodded and went to the stove. He showed Li Mei how to put wood in it and how to light the fire. Li Mei watched carefully and asked questions with her hands and facial expressions. When the fire was burning well, she clapped her hands together softly and said something that sounded happy. For breakfast, Samuel started to make his usual meal of eggs and bread, but Li Mei gently touched his arm and pointed to herself. She seemed to want to cook. Samuel stepped back and let her try. Li Mei looked through Samuel's simple food supplies. She found the eggs and some vegetables that were starting to get old. She also found some flour and salt. Samuel watched as she began to cook in a way he had never seen before. Li Mei mixed the flour with water and a little salt. She rolled it thin with a bottle since Samuel did not have a rolling pin. Then she cut the dough into long, thin strips. She boiled water and cooked the strips like noodles. While the noodles cooked, Li Mei scrambled the eggs with the vegetables. She moved around the kitchen like she had been cooking there for years. Samuel was impressed by how quickly she learned to use his equipment. When the food was ready, Li Mei put it on 2 plates. It looked different from Samuel's usual breakfast, but it smelled good. Samuel tasted it and was surprised. The noodles were soft and flavorful. The eggs and vegetables were cooked perfectly. Good, Samuel said, pointing to the food. Very good. He smiled at Li Mei and she smiled back. She seemed proud that he liked her cooking. After breakfast, Samuel needed to do his daily work on the ranch. He pointed outside and made gestures to show Li Mei that he was going to work with the cattle. Li Mei nodded that she understood. Samuel spent the morning checking on his animals and fixing a fence that had been damaged by the wind. When he came back to the house for lunch, he found Li Mei had been busy. The house looked different. Li Mei had cleaned everything until it shined. She had organized the shelves and swept the floors. She had even found some old curtains in a trunk and hung them in the windows. The house felt more like a home than it had in months. Samuel was amazed. In just one morning, Li Mei had made his house look better than it had since his mother died. He wanted to tell her how grateful he was, but he did not know how to say it in a way she would understand. Samuel pointed to the clean house and then to Li Mei. "Thank you," he said slowly and clearly. He put his hand over his heart to show that he really meant it. Li Mei seemed to understand. She said something in her language that sounded like, "You're welcome." That afternoon, Samuel decided to teach Li Mei some English words. He pointed to objects around the house and said their names slowly. "Table," he said, pointing to the wooden table. "Chair, window, door." Li Mei repeated each word carefully. Her pronunciation was different from Samuel's, but he could understand what she was trying to say. She was a quick learner. Li Mei also tried to teach Samuel some words in her language. She pointed to herself and said, "Li Mei," more clearly than she had before. Samuel realized he had been saying her name wrong. She taught him to say it correctly. Li Mei pointed to the water and said something in Chinese. Samuel tried to repeat it, but the sounds were very difficult for him. Li Mei laughed, but not in a mean way. She was patient with him like he was patient with her. In the evening, Samuel showed Li Mei his small collection of books. Most of them were about farming and cattle, but there were a few storybooks that had belonged to his mother. Li Mei looked through the books with interest even though she could not read the English words. Li Mei went to her bag and brought out something wrapped in silk cloth. She unwrapped it carefully and showed Samuel a small book with Chinese writing. The pages were thin and delicate, and the characters were written in beautiful black ink. Samuel looked at the Chinese book with wonder. The writing looked like art to him. Li Mei opened the book and read a few lines out loud. Her voice was musical and gentle. Samuel could not understand the words, but he enjoyed listening to her. Li Mei tried to explain what the book was about. She pointed to the moon and stars, then to the book. She made gestures that looked like people dancing or celebrating. Samuel thought it might be stories or poems about festivals or celebrations. As the days passed, Samuel and Li Mei developed a routine. Samuel did his work outside while Li Mei took care of the house. In the evenings, they would sit together and try to teach each other their languages. They also used drawings and gestures to communicate. Samuel drew pictures of his cattle and horses to show Li Mei what he did for work. Li Mei drew pictures of her family and her home in China. She showed him drawings of her parents and younger brother. Samuel could see that she missed them very much. Li Mei also drew pictures of the journey that brought her to America. She showed him ships and trains and many different places. Samuel began to understand that Li Mei had traveled much, farther than Margaret would have traveled from Ireland. One day, Li Mei found Samuel's mother's sewing basket. She asked with gestures if she could use it. Samuel nodded, happy that someone would use his mother's things again. Li Mei began mending Samuel's clothes. His shirts had tears and his pants had holes from working on the ranch. Li Mei fixed everything, with tiny, perfect stitches. She also made the clothes look better than they had when they were new. Samuel was grateful for all of Li Mei's help, but he worried that she was working too hard. He tried to tell her that she did not have to do so. Much work, but Li Mei seemed to want to help. She acted like taking care of the house, and Samuel's clothes was her way of saying thank you for giving her a safe place to stay. One evening, Samuel noticed that Li Mei looked sad. She was sitting by the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. Samuel sat down near her and tried to ask what was wrong. Li Mei pointed to the mountains and then to her heart. Then she pointed east, toward where China would be. Samuel understood that she was homesick. She was missing her family and the place where she grew up. Samuel wanted to comfort her, but he did not know how. He went to the kitchen and made tea, the way Li Mei had taught him. He brought it to her and sat quietly beside her. Li Mei accepted the tea and gave Samuel a small, sad smile. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Samuel realized that even though they could not talk very much, they were starting to understand each other in other ways. That night, Samuel lay in the barn thinking about how much his life had changed. A few weeks ago, his house had been empty and quiet. Now it was full of good smells from Li Mei's cooking and the sound of her gentle movements. Samuel was beginning to think that maybe Li Mei's arrival was not a mistake after all. 3 weeks had passed since Li Mei arrived at Samuel's ranch. The early October air was getting colder, and Samuel knew winter would come soon. He spent his days preparing for the harsh months ahead, cutting wood and making sure his cattle had enough shelter. One morning, Samuel found Li Mei in the kitchen drawing on a piece of paper with charcoal from the fireplace. When she saw him watching, she quickly tried to hide her drawing, but Samuel had already seen enough to surprise him. Li Mei was not just making simple pictures. She was writing Chinese characters that looked like real writing, not just drawings. The lines were smooth and beautiful, made with skill that took years to learn. Samuel pointed to the paper and then to Li Mei with questioning eyes. Li Mei looked nervous, like she thought she might be in trouble for using his paper. Samuel smiled and shook his head to show he was not angry. Samuel went to his shelf and brought back one of his books. He opened it and pointed to the English words, then pointed to Li Mei's Chinese characters. "Same," he said. "Writing, same." Li Mei's face lit up with understanding. She nodded eagerly and pointed to herself, then to the Chinese characters. She said something in her language that Samuel thought meant, "I can write." Samuel was amazed. In his town, many people could not read or write very well. Even some of the men who owned businesses had trouble with writing. But Li Mei, this small woman from far away, could make these beautiful characters that looked like art. Samuel brought Li Mei more paper and showed her his pencils. Li Mei was very grateful. She began writing more Chinese characters, and then she tried to write English words underneath them. Samuel helped her with the English spelling. Li Mei wrote the Chinese word for water, and then tried to write water in English letters. Samuel helped her get the letters right. Then Li Mei wrote the Chinese word for house, and Samuel helped her write house. This became their new way of learning from each other. Li Mei would write Chinese words, and Samuel would help her with the English. Then Samuel would point to things and Li Mei would teach him how to say them in Chinese. Samuel learned that Li Mei's Chinese name meant beautiful plum blossom. He tried to say it correctly, and Li Mei was patient with him when he got the sounds wrong. Samuel told Li Mei that his name meant asked of God. Li Mei tried to understand this, and Samuel drew pictures to help explain. One afternoon, Samuel was working near the house when he heard Li Mei calling for him. Her voice sounded worried. Samuel ran to the house and found Li Mei pointing to one of his cows in the distance. The cow was lying on the ground and looked sick. Samuel grabbed his hat and hurried toward the animal. Li Mei followed him, even though she was wearing her good shoes and a dress. When they reached the cow, Samuel could see that she was about to have a baby calf. But something was wrong. The birth was not happening the way it should. Samuel had helped with many births before, but this one was difficult. Samuel rolled up his sleeves and began to help the cow. Li Mei watched from a distance at first, but when she saw that Samuel needed help, she came closer. Samuel showed her how to hold the cow's head and speak softly to keep the animal calm. Li Mei was gentle with the cow. She spoke to the animal. In Chinese, her voice soft and soothing. Samuel worked to help the calf be born safely. Li Mei did not seem afraid of the blood or the mess. After an hour of difficult work, the calf was finally born. It was small but healthy. The mother cow was tired but fine. Samuel and Li Mei were both covered with dirt and blood, but they were smiling. Samuel looked at Li Mei with new respect. Many women from town would not have stayed to help with such dirty, difficult work. But Li Mei had been brave and helpful. "Good," Samuel said to Li Mei, pointing to her and then to the baby calf. "Very good help." Li Mei smiled and said something in Chinese that Samuel thought meant she was happy to help. That evening, as they cleaned up from the long day, Samuel realized how much he had learned about Li Mei. She was not just a woman who could cook and clean. She was educated, brave, and willing to work hard. She did not complain about difficult situations. After dinner, Li Mei began to tell Samuel more about her life in China. She used drawings, English words, and gestures to help him understand. Li Mei drew a picture of a large house with many rooms. She pointed to herself and then to the house to show that this was where she had lived. Then she drew pictures of many people, her family. Samuel counted the people in Li Mei's drawing. There were 7 people total. Li Mei pointed to an older man and woman who must be her parents. Then she pointed to 4 other people who looked younger. Samuel understood that Li Mei had 3 brothers and 1 sister. Li Mei drew another picture that showed her sitting at a table with books. Samuel understood that Li Mei had been a student. She had been learning to read and write, not just doing housework. Then Li Mei's pictures became sadder. She drew a picture of herself with a man she clearly did not want to marry. The man looked older and stern. Li Mei made faces and gestures that showed she was afraid of this man. Samuel began to understand that Li Mei had run away from an arranged marriage. Her parents had wanted her to marry someone she did not love. Li Mei had been brave enough to leave her family and travel to America to find a better life. Samuel felt sorry for Li Mei. She had given up everything, her family, her home, her country, to escape a marriage she did not want. Now she was stuck, on a lonely ranch with a man she could barely talk to. Samuel used drawings to tell Li Mei about his own life. He drew pictures of himself as a child with his parents. He showed her how he had learned to take care of cattle and horses from his father. Samuel also drew a picture of Margaret and tried to explain that he had been expecting to marry someone else. Li Mei looked sad when she understood this. She pointed to herself and then made a gesture like she was asking if Samuel wished she would go away. Samuel shook his head quickly. "No," he said firmly. "Stay. You stay here." He pointed around the house and then to Li Mei. "This is your home now." Li Mei looked surprised. Samuel took her hand gently and said, "Safe here. You are safe here." Li Mei's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. She said something in Chinese that Samuel thought meant, "Thank you." That night, Samuel realized that his feelings about Li Mei were changing. At first, he had just felt sorry for her and wanted to help her because she was lost and scared. But now he was beginning to care about her as a person. Li Mei was smart and kind. She worked hard and never complained. She was trying to learn his language and his ways of living. She had helped him with his work and made his house into a real home. Samuel also realized that Li Mei might be feeling the same way about him. She seemed happy when he came home from work. She smiled when he tried to speak Chinese. She had stayed to help him with the difficult cow birth when she could have gone back to the house. As Samuel lay in the barn, he wondered what would happen next. Winter was coming, and they would be spending many long months together in the house. They were learning to communicate better every day. Samuel found himself looking forward to seeing Li Mei each morning and talking with her each evening. For the first time since Li Mei had arrived, Samuel began to think that maybe this strange situation might turn out to be something good for both of them. November came with the first snow. Samuel watched the sky with worry as dark clouds gathered over the mountains. The wind was getting stronger and colder each day. Samuel had lived through many Montana winters, and he knew this one would be harsh. Li Mei had never seen snow before. When the first white flakes began to fall, she ran outside and held out her hands to catch them. She laughed with joy as the snow touched her skin and melted. Samuel watched her from the doorway, smiling at her happiness. But Samuel knew that snow in Montana was not just beautiful. It could be dangerous. He spent the next few days making sure they had enough firewood stacked near the house. He also moved his cattle to the sheltered area near the barn where they would be safer from the wind. Li Mei helped Samuel prepare for winter. She had found his mother's old quilts and blankets and cleaned them carefully. She also learned to preserve food for the long months ahead. Samuel showed her how to smoke meat and store vegetables so they would not spoil. Li Mei was a quick learner. She helped Samuel move the heavy sacks of grain and flour into the house where they would stay dry. She also learned to make candles using fat from the animals and string for wicks. Their English and Chinese lessons continued by the fireplace each evening. Samuel could now say many simple things in Chinese, and Li Mei could have short conversations in English. They still used gestures and drawings, but words were becoming easier. One evening in late November, Li Mei was trying to explain something to Samuel about her family. She drew a picture of a festival with many people celebrating. She used the English words she knew: happy, food, family, together. Samuel understood that Li Mei was describing a holiday in China when families came together. Li Mei looked sad as she talked about it. Samuel realized that Li Mei would not see her family for this special time. Samuel wanted to make Li Mei feel better. He told her about Christmas, which would come in December. He drew pictures of a tree with candles and presents. He explained that Christmas was when American families came together. "We make Christmas," Samuel said carefully. "You and me. Family." Li Mei looked surprised. Samuel pointed to himself and then to her. "Family," he said again. "We are family." Now Li Mei smiled, but Samuel could see tears in her eyes. She said something in Chinese that sounded like she was grateful. The first big storm came in early December. Samuel woke up in the barn to find that snow had blown in through the cracks in the walls. The wind was howling like a wild animal, and the temperature had dropped dangerously low. Samuel knew he needed to check on his cattle, but the storm was too strong to go outside safely. He could barely see the house through the blowing snow. Samuel decided to wait until the wind died down, but the storm got worse instead of better. By afternoon, Samuel was worried about his animals. Some of his cattle were pregnant and would need extra care in the cold weather. Samuel put on his heaviest coat and wrapped a scarf around his face. He told Li Mei he was going to check the animals. Li Mei looked frightened and tried to tell him not to go outside. But Samuel knew his cattle could die if he did not help them. The wind was so strong that Samuel could barely walk. The snow was deep and still falling. Samuel made his way slowly toward the barn where his cattle were sheltering. When Samuel reached the barn, he found that 2 of his pregnant cows were in trouble. The cold and stress of the storm had caused them to go into labor early. Samuel knew he had to help them, or he would lose both the mothers and their babies. Samuel worked for hours in the freezing barn. His hands became so cold that he could barely move his fingers. But he managed to help one cow deliver her calf safely. The second cow was having more trouble. As Samuel worked with the second cow, he slipped on the icy floor of the barn. He fell hard and felt sharp pain in his left leg. When Samuel tried to stand up, he realized his leg was badly hurt. He could not put weight on it. Samuel was trapped in the barn with injured animals and a hurt leg. The storm was still raging outside, and he could not walk back to the house. Samuel began to worry that he might freeze to death before morning. But then Samuel heard someone calling his name through the wind. Li Mei had come looking for him. She appeared in the barn doorway like an angel, covered in snow but determined to help him. Li Mei saw immediately that Samuel was hurt. She also saw that the cow still needed help. Without hesitation, Li Mei took off her coat and rolled up her sleeves. She knelt down beside the cow and began to help with the birth. Samuel was amazed. Li Mei worked calmly and carefully, doing exactly what needed to be done. She spoke softly to the cow in Chinese, keeping the animal calm. After another hour of work, the second calf was born, healthy and strong. Then Li Mei turned her attention to Samuel. She looked at his injured leg and gently felt the bones. Samuel winced with pain, but Li Mei's touch was gentle and sure. She said something in Chinese that sounded like she was telling him everything would be okay. Li Mei helped Samuel stand up and put his arm around her shoulders. Even though she was much smaller than Samuel, she was strong enough to support his weight. Together they made their way slowly back to the house through the blizzard. Inside the warm house, Li Mei helped Samuel sit down near the fireplace. She carefully removed his wet boots and socks. Samuel's leg was swollen and painful, but Li Mei did not seem frightened by his injury. Li Mei went to her bag and brought out a small cloth pouch. Inside were dried herbs and plants that Samuel did not recognize. Li Mei boiled water and made a tea with some of the herbs. She gave the tea to Samuel to drink. The tea tasted bitter, but Samuel felt some of his pain begin to fade. Li Mei also made a paste with other herbs and warm water. She wrapped this paste around Samuel's injured leg with strips of clean cloth. As Li Mei worked, she talked to Samuel in a mixture of Chinese and English. Samuel understood that Li Mei had learned about healing from her grandmother in China. The herbs and treatments were things that had been passed down in her family for many generations. Samuel felt grateful and amazed. Li Mei had risked her own life to save him and his cattle. She had worked bravely in the freezing barn and then cared for his injury with knowledge he did not have. The storm continued for 3 more days. Samuel and Li Mei were trapped in the house together, but Samuel found that he enjoyed the time with Li Mei. His leg was healing well thanks to her herbs and care. During the long days of the storm, Samuel and Li Mei talked more than they ever had before. They shared stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. Even though they still had to use simple words and gestures, they understood each other better than ever. Li Mei told Samuel more about why she had left China. Her father had wanted to arrange a marriage with an older man who already had 2 wives. Li Mei would have been the 3rd wife and would have had no freedom or happiness. Samuel told Li Mei about the loneliness he had felt after his parents died. He explained how he had hoped that Margaret would help him start a family and make the ranch feel alive again. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Samuel realized that Li Mei had already made the ranch feel alive. Her laughter, her cooking, her gentle presence had changed everything about his life. Samuel looked at Li Mei and felt something he had never felt before, not even when he was writing to Margaret. Samuel was falling in love with Li Mei, not just grateful for her help, not just friendly toward a person living in his house, but truly in love. Li Mei was brave, kind, intelligent, and beautiful. She had made his house into a home and his lonely life into something worth living. When Samuel looked into Li Mei's eyes that evening, he thought he saw the same feelings reflected back at him. Li Mei seemed happy and peaceful in a way she had not been when she first arrived. She smiled at Samuel with warmth that went beyond friendship. The storm finally ended on the 4th day. When the sun came out, Samuel and Li Mei walked outside together to check on the animals. Samuel's leg was much better, and all of his cattle had survived the storm safely. As they stood in the bright snow, looking at the beautiful white world around them, Samuel felt like everything in his life had changed. The storm had tested them, and they had come through it together. Samuel knew that Li Mei was no longer just a stranger who had arrived by mistake. She was the person he wanted to spend his life with. Spring came late to Montana that year. The snow finally melted in March, and Samuel knew it was time to make the trip to town for supplies. He had not been to Cedar Falls since the day Li Mei arrived 5 months ago. His food supplies were running low, and he needed new tools for the spring work on his ranch. Samuel was nervous about taking Li Mei to town. He remembered how people had stared at her when she first arrived, but Li Mei needed fabric to make new clothes, and Samuel wanted her to see more of America than just his ranch. Li Mei was excited about going to town. She had learned much more English during the winter months, and she was curious to see other people and places. She put on her best dress and arranged her hair carefully. Samuel hitched his horses to the wagon and loaded the things he wanted to sell in town. Li Mei brought a basket of eggs and some of her beautiful sewing work that she thought people might want to buy. The ride to town was pleasant. The spring air was warm, and wildflowers were beginning to bloom along the road. Li Mei pointed to different flowers and asked Samuel their names in English. Samuel enjoyed teaching her new words, but as they got closer to Cedar Falls, Samuel began to feel worried. What would people say about Li Mei living on his ranch all winter? What would they think about a Chinese woman and a white man traveling together? When they reached the main street of town, people stopped what they were doing to stare at them. Samuel heard whispers as he helped Li Mei down from the wagon. Some of the comments were not kind. "Look at that," said Mrs. Patterson from the hotel. "Samuel Morrison with that Chinese girl again. Been living together all winter, I heard," said another woman. Scandalous. Samuel felt his face get hot with anger, but he tried to ignore the comments. Li Mei walked close beside him, her head held high. Samuel was proud of how brave she looked, even though he knew the stares and whispers must hurt her feelings. Their first stop was the general store. Mr. Johnson, the store owner, was polite but cold. He sold Samuel the supplies he needed, but he kept looking at Li Mei with suspicious eyes. When Li Mei asked to see some fabric, Mr. Johnson was reluctant to show her the good materials. "Don't know if she can pay for these," he said to Samuel, talking about Li Mei like she was not there. "She can pay," Samuel said firmly. "And she speaks English, so you can talk to her directly." Li Mei chose some simple blue fabric and paid for it with money she had earned from selling eggs to Samuel. Mr. Johnson seemed surprised that Li Mei had her own money. Their next stop was the bank. Samuel needed to deposit money from selling his cattle. The bank manager, Mr. Davis, had always been friendly to Samuel before, but today he seemed uncomfortable. "Samuel," Mr. Davis said quietly, "people are talking about your situation. Is it wise to bring her to town?" Samuel felt angry. "Li Mei is a good person," he said. "She works hard and helps me on the ranch. I don't care what people say." Mr. Davis looked around nervously. "It's just that some folks think it's not proper. A Chinese woman living with a white man without being married." Samuel realized that people thought he and Li Mei were living together as husband and wife. He wanted to explain that Li Mei slept in the house while he slept in the barn, but he also realized that it did not matter what the truth was. People had made up their minds. As Samuel and Li Mei walked down the street, Samuel noticed that some people crossed to the other side to avoid walking near them. Children stared at Li Mei and whispered to each other. Samuel felt protective of Li Mei and angry at the unfairness. At the church, they met Reverend Miller. Samuel had known the Reverend since he was a child. Reverend Miller was usually a kind man, but today he looked stern. "Samuel," the Reverend said, "I think we need to talk about your living situation. It's causing concern among the church members." Samuel felt frustrated. "Li Mei is a good Christian woman," he said. "She prays every morning and evening. She helps me and never causes any trouble." "But she's not a Christian," Reverend Miller said. "She's a heathen from China, and you're not married to her. This is not right in the eyes of God." Li Mei stood quietly beside Samuel, understanding enough English to know that the Reverend was saying negative things about her. Samuel saw hurt in her eyes, and it made him angry. "Li Mei is a better person than most people in this town," Samuel said loudly. "She saved my life during the winter storm. She works harder than anyone I know. If God judges people by their actions, then Li Mei is one of his best children." The Reverend looked shocked that Samuel would speak so boldly. Other people had gathered around to listen to the argument. The worst moment came when they encountered Mr. Caldwell, the wealthiest rancher in the area. Caldwell was a large man who owned 3 times as much land as Samuel. He had always been arrogant, but Samuel had tolerated him because Caldwell was powerful in the community. When Caldwell saw Li Mei, his eyes filled with a look that made Samuel's stomach turn. Caldwell walked over to them with a smile that was not friendly. "Well, Samuel," Caldwell said, "I see you've got yourself a little China doll. Where did you find such an exotic pet?" Samuel stepped between Caldwell and Li Mei. "Li Mei is not a pet," he said. "She's a lady, and you'll treat her with respect." Caldwell laughed. "A lady? Chinese women aren't ladies, Samuel. They're just pretty toys for men to play with." Caldwell reached out as if he was going to touch Li Mei's arm. Samuel grabbed Caldwell's wrist and squeezed hard. "Don't touch her," Samuel said in a voice that was dangerous and quiet. Caldwell tried to pull his arm away, but Samuel was stronger. Then he looked. "You're making a mistake, Morrison," Caldwell said. "I could buy your little ranch and throw you both off my land." "Try it," Samuel said. He let go of Caldwell's wrist and pushed him back. "Li Mei is under my protection. Anyone who disrespects her will answer to me." A crowd had gathered to watch the confrontation. Samuel looked around at all the faces staring at him and Li Mei. Some people looked hostile, some looked curious, and a few looked sympathetic. Samuel took Li Mei's hand and held it up for everyone to see. "This woman saved my life," he announced. "She works harder than any of you, she's kinder than any of you, and she's braver than any of you. I'm proud to have her in my life." Li Mei looked up at Samuel with tears in her eyes. But they were tears of gratitude, not shame. She squeezed his hand and stood straighter. Samuel and Li Mei finished their business in town quickly and left. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Samuel worried that Li Mei was upset by the way people had treated her. Finally, Li Mei spoke. "Thank you," she said in English. "You are a good man. You protect me." Samuel looked at Li Mei and felt his heart swell with emotion. "I will always protect you," he said. "Always." Li Mei smiled. "I know," she said. "I trust you." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Samuel realized that the trip to town had changed something between them. By defending Li Mei publicly, Samuel had declared his feelings for her. And Li Mei's gratitude had shown him that she cared for him too. Samuel also realized that they would have to make a decision soon. They could not continue living together without being married, not if they wanted to be accepted by the community. And Samuel was beginning to realize that he wanted to marry Li Mei, not because he had to, but because he loved her. The question was whether Li Mei felt the same way about him, and whether two people from such different backgrounds could really build a life together in a place where many people would never accept them. Samuel looked at Li Mei's beautiful profile in the soft evening light and knew that he was ready to find out the answers to those questions. 2 weeks after their difficult trip to town, Samuel found a letter waiting for him at the post office. The envelope was official-looking and came from the immigration office in San Francisco. Samuel's hand shook as he opened it. The letter explained the mix-up that had brought Li Mei to his ranch instead of Margaret O'Sullivan. Li Mei's travel papers had been accidentally switched with Margaret's at the immigration station. The letter said that officials had found Li Mei's cousin in Sacramento, and they could arrange for Li Mei to travel there to live with her family. Samuel read the letter 3 times, his heart sinking with each reading. Li Mei could leave. She could go to live with people who spoke her language and understood her culture. She could have a life that made sense. That same day, another letter arrived. This one was from the mail-order bride agency. They had located Margaret O'Sullivan, who was currently in Denver, Colorado. Margaret was still willing to come to Montana and marry Samuel if he wanted her to. Samuel sat on his porch holding both letters. After all these months, he could have the life he had originally planned. Margaret would come, they would marry, and he would have the Irish wife he had been expecting. Everything could go back to his original plan. But as Samuel looked across his ranch, he realized that nothing felt the same as it had before Li Mei arrived. The house was warm and welcoming now. The meals were delicious and interesting. The evenings were filled with conversation and laughter. Li Mei had brought life and joy to his lonely ranch. Samuel also realized that he had changed. Before Li Mei came, he had been content with his simple, quiet life. Now he enjoyed learning new things. He liked hearing stories about faraway places. He appreciated Li Mei's different way of looking at the world. When Li Mei came home from working in her garden, Samuel showed her the letters. Li Mei's English was good enough now that she could read most of the first letter. Samuel helped her understand the parts that were difficult. Li Mei's face became very serious as she read. When she finished, she looked up at Samuel with sad eyes. "I can go to my cousin," she said quietly. "You can marry Irish woman like you planned." Samuel folded the letters and put them aside. "What do you want to do?" he asked Li Mei. Li Mei was quiet for a long time. She looked out at the mountains and the wide sky. Finally, she spoke. "I want to stay," she said. "But I know you planned a different life. You planned to marry Margaret." Samuel moved closer to Li Mei on the porch bench. "I did plan to marry Margaret," he said. "But that was before I knew you. Now I cannot imagine my life without you." Li Mei looked at Samuel with surprise. "You want me to stay?" she asked. Samuel took Li Mei's hands in his. I want you to stay forever, he said. I want you to be my wife. I love you, Li Mei. Tears filled Li Mei's eyes. I love you too, she said. But people in town do not like us together. It will be hard life. Samuel nodded. It will be hard sometimes, he agreed. But we will face it together. You made me brave when you saved my life in the storm. Now I want to be brave for you. Li Mei smiled through her tears. You are already brave, she said. You defended me in town. You stood up to mean people. That evening, Samuel and Li Mei sat by the fireplace and talked about their future. They decided that if they were going to marry, they wanted to do it properly. They would ask Reverend Miller to perform the ceremony, even though he had been critical of their living situation. They also decided to write letters to Li Mei's family in China. Li Mei wanted her parents to know that she was safe and happy. She wanted them to understand that she had found love and a good life in America. Samuel wrote to the immigration office to tell them that Li Mei would not be going to Sacramento. He also wrote to the mail-order bride agency to tell them that he would not be needing Margaret O'Sullivan's services. The next Sunday, Samuel and Li Mei went to church together. Many people stared at them, and some whispered, but Samuel and Li Mei sat together with dignity. After the service, Samuel asked to speak with Reverend Miller privately. Reverend, Samuel said, Li Mei and I want to be married. Will you perform the ceremony? Reverend Miller looked uncomfortable. Samuel, I'm not sure this is wise. You and this woman come from very different worlds. Yes, we do, Samuel agreed. But we love each other. We want to build a life together. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be about? Li Mei stepped forward. Reverend Miller, she said in her careful English, I learn about Jesus from Samuel. I read Bible now. I want to be good Christian wife. The Reverend looked surprised that Li Mei spoke to him directly. He studied her serious, honest face. Finally, he sighed. If you both truly want this, I will marry you, but you should know that some people in this community will not approve. We know, Samuel said, but we're not asking for everyone's approval. We're asking for God's blessing on our marriage. Samuel and Li Mei planned a simple wedding for the following month. Li Mei sewed herself a beautiful white dress using fabric that Samuel bought for her on a special trip to the larger town 50 miles away. Samuel bought a new suit and polished his boots until they shined. The biggest surprise came 3 days before the wedding. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow who lived near the church, came to visit Samuel and Li Mei. Mrs. Henderson had always been kind, but Samuel had not expected her to visit. I wanted to meet your bride properly, Mrs. Henderson said to Samuel. She sat down with Li Mei and asked her about her life in China and her journey to America. Li Mei told Mrs. Henderson her story honestly. She explained about running away from the arranged marriage and about the mix-up with the travel papers. Mrs. Henderson listened with interest and sympathy. You're a brave young woman, Mrs. Henderson told Li Mei. I admire your courage. I also admire the way you've made a home for Samuel. That boy needed someone to take care of him. Mrs. Henderson offered to help Li Mei prepare for the wedding. She brought flowers from her garden and helped Li Mei arrange them. She also taught Li Mei some American wedding traditions. On the wedding day, the church was not full, but it was not empty either. Mrs. Henderson was there, along with a few other kind neighbors. Mr. Johnson from the general store came, and even Mr. Brown from the stagecoach station attended. Li Mei looked beautiful in her white dress with flowers in her hair. Samuel wore his new suit and could not stop smiling. When Reverend Miller asked if they promised to love and honor each other, both Samuel and Li Mei said, I do, with strong, clear voices. After the ceremony, Mrs. Henderson had prepared a small celebration at her house. The people who had come to the wedding shared cake and congratulated the new couple. It was not a large party, but it was warm and friendly. As Samuel and Li Mei rode home to their ranch as husband and wife, Li Mei leaned against Samuel's shoulder. Are you happy? Samuel asked her. Very happy, Li Mei said. I never thought I would find love and family in America, but I found both with you. Samuel looked out at his land, which was now their land. The house, which was now their home, the future, which was now their future to build together. I never thought I would find someone who could make my life so much better, Samuel said. Margaret might have been a good wife, but she would not have been the right wife for me. You are exactly right for me. Li Mei smiled. We are a good match, she said. Different, but good together. That evening, Samuel and Li Mei sat on their porch as they had done so many times before. But tonight was different. Tonight they were truly family. Tonight they belonged to each other completely. Li Mei had written a long letter to her parents in China, telling them about her new husband and her new life. She told them about the ranch and the mountains and the wide open sky. She told them that she was safe and loved and happy. Samuel had also written to Margaret O'Sullivan in Denver, wishing her well and hoping she would find happiness with someone else. He felt no sadness about giving up his original plan. His new plan was so much better. As the stars came out over the Montana sky, Samuel and Li Mei made plans for their future. They would improve the ranch and maybe raise children who would speak both English and Chinese. They would face whatever challenges came their way together. Li Mei had traveled thousands of miles from her home in China to find a new life in America. Samuel had waited patiently for a bride to share his lonely ranch. Neither of them had gotten what they expected, but both of them had found something much better than what they had planned. Their love story had begun with confusion and fear, but it had grown into something strong and beautiful. Samuel and Li Mei had learned that the best things in life sometimes come in unexpected packages, and that true love can bridge any distance or difference.